Take a look at this image and say what comes to mind immediately. If you said sun, you are probably looking at the big picture, which means you're exhibiting something called global precedence. If you said star, then you're focusing on the details first, which is called local precedence. While it varies at the individual level, the dominant attention mode is looking at the whole picture first before looking at the details. But some researchers wonder if that could be changing due to mobile device use. I saw a few news articles reference a research article on the subject, and these articles mention Generation Alpha, so I decided to check it out further. The particular article they were referencing is called Mobile Use Induces Local Attention Precedence and is associated with limited sociocognitive skills in preschoolers, and was published in the journal Computers and Human Behavior. Before we get into that though, why does your dominant attention mode matter? If mobile use could affect this, what impact could it have? Well, for one, I found a different study, this one from 2019, titled Global Processing Makes People Happier Than Local Processing, implying that it could actually even impact your happiness. Keep in mind the author said this could be a two-way street where when you're in a better mood, you are more prone to global processing, and also when you think more globally, it can result in a better mood. Back to this study though. The author, Veronica Connick, says, focusing on the global picture helps us in perceiving the world in meaningful, coherent patterns, and not just as a bunch of unrelated spots. She goes on to say, we automatically process the global pattern, even if we intend to pay attention only to the details. For example, if we have a focus solely on the small details of the picture like above to decide if they are sun-shaped or not, we cannot ignore the big picture, which can be different from the small shapes, and this slows down our reaction. However, if we have to focus on the big picture, the little details do not confuse us because we do not process them automatically. Researchers note that people who pay attention to the details tend to be better at analytical thinking, but that could be in exchange for being less creative and having weaker social skills. This statement possibly led to an article on mobs.com titled, Generation Alpha may have less art-inclined kids, here's why. I think that may be a bit of a stretch, and based on some things I've seen and some conversations I've had, I think it might be more accurate to say that art would be expressed differently or in a different style. All in all, like most things, there are pros and cons to different ways of thinking. This study actually looks at some other things too, which I'll mention, but first, if you want to test your own global versus local processing, I have linked to a test below as long as it remains active. So comment your results below if you want. Okay, so let's look at the two studies they did. Both looked at a sample of children aged 4 to 6. In the first one, they essentially divide them into two groups, user and non-user, meaning they do use mobile devices, including tablets, on a regular basis, or they do not. And then they had them take some tests. First was a preschool version of the Navon test, which is designed to look at global versus local processing. Without getting into too much detail, they found that both groups performed faster on the selective global session and slower on the divided attention task. When they performed a selective attention task, kids in both groups were faster for global aspects. This is typical. In the divided attention task, when they needed to attend to both the global and local aspects at the same time, the non-device using children exhibited global precedence, which is historically typical, whereas the device using children showed local precedence. Now, the researchers found no difference in emotional recognition between the two groups, which I think is good, but there was also a difference in theory of mind between the two groups. Users showed what the researchers described as poorer theory of mind skills compared to the non-users. Theory of mind is basically the ability to attribute mental states to ourselves and others. So just to help you better understand, they used two tasks to measure this in the kids. One was the contents false belief task, and the other one was the real apparent emotion task. The real apparent emotion task test involved telling children a story about a boy who wanted to hide a negative emotion, and then asking them later about the boy's actual portrayed emotions through use of a picture which they could choose the emotions from. Basically, they did well if they were able to differentiate the actual versus portrayed emotion. And now I want to give you an example of something like they did for the false belief task. Okay, so here we have a pasta box. Think about what's inside. A marker! Yep. Do you remember what you thought was inside it before you saw? Pasta. Marker. If someone else couldn't see inside this pasta box, what do you think they would think is in it? Pasta. Marker. The researchers also referenced past research that has shown that more media use, such as higher TV exposure, has been linked to poorer theory of mind performance in preschoolers. They seem to believe that social experiences are more important for higher order cognitive theory of mind skills as opposed to emotion recognition, probably seeing as both groups perform similarly on the latter. Now, the second study was more experimental. This time they divided kids into 3 groups. Some played a fast digital game, some played a slow digital game, and some played a non-digital game. These were similar in that the 2 digital games were the same, just one was faster. The digital games involved exploding a balloon just by touching it. The non-digital game was a whack-a-mole game where they push down the moles which pop up with their fingers. All games were 6 minutes long. So they had the kids in these 3 groups play the games and then they tested them. They found children who played the slow digital game and the non-digital game performed better on the selective attention test than on the divided attention test. Children who played the fast game actually performed similarly on both tests. Now, they know that the differences between the groups were not large enough to get significant differences between groups in selective and divided attention performance, and they can't say for sure whether the selective attention improved or divided attention got worse or both for the fast digital game group. That being said, they say that it is possible that the act of attending to multiple stimuli at the same time in the fast game could have led to improved performance in divided attention. This would be consistent with some past studies that showed that video games can be linked to better divided attention skills. Basically, they can't say for sure which way it went. However, children in all groups showed global precedence in the selective attention task. However, in the divided attention task, the children who played the digital game showed local precedence. All in all, the researchers seem to think that playing games, even for a short time, like 6 minutes, can cause you to shift from global to local processing. The researchers suggest that these results could be because mobile use often requires you to focus more on fine details and precise motor movements. Plus, there are times when you use a screen and you can't see everything at one time, so you don't even get the big picture. For example, if on your phone or whatever, you might be zoomed in on a certain part and you may need to scroll down to get the full picture. They say this is in contrast to printed documents where you can quickly scan the whole text at once or see an image and you don't need to scroll. In terms of looking at children this young, their brains are quite malleable, so it's good to be aware of how things could impact them in the long term. But really, these things could affect older people as well. We may need to consider different ways of presenting educational material, if children and people in general are starting to look at things differently, or even if they're just on their mobile devices or playing games more frequently and their processing shifts. Now, I also want to just touch on some of the limitations of the study that the authors themselves mention. First, the sample sizes were small, with a final sample size of 40 for the study 1 and 56 for study 2. The groups were similar in age, gender, parental education, and number. I don't know the racial/ethnic diversity, but I assume it is low, seeing as it took place in Hungary. In terms of the games, the non-digital game had more colors and sounds, which could have also played a role. Additionally, note for study 1 that correlation does not prove causation. In terms of the second study, it was experimental, but it would be good to see it replicated. The reason this is relevant generation-wise is that if we have something that is powerful enough to change the way people see things, it seems important because these kinds of shifts and differences are part of what is meant to designate one generation from another. Of course, there's not usually an exact line, it's more of a gradual difference. Obviously, we know mobile devices can affect us in a myriad of ways, but it's interesting to delve a little bit more into the specifics, I think. So basically, that is it. Please give this a thumbs up if you found anything interesting, even a little bit, and subscribe if you want to see more content that is like this and not like this. See you next time!